Ahoy there! Captain Benzie here, coming at you from inside the Fulmination content creator test server with another extra special ship fitting guide for EVE Echoes. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the ORTHRUS, which is the Mordu's Legion faction cruiser. We've already had a look at the Gamma on this channel, so it's worth checking that out if you are interested in Mordu's Legion. And of course Mordu's Legion are one of the factions that is not currently available in EVE Echoes in live. So we are using the Fulmination content creator test server for this one. That does of course come with that addendum that anything you see here is of course subject to change. We're looking as it is on a test server, things may change before we hit live. Now what we're going to do is have a look at what this ship is, what it does, what makes it special. We're going to have a look at fitting it, and then we're going to take it out for a spin and showcase it in action towards the end of the video. So if you do enjoy this video, let me know by hitting like on it. Subscribe to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding that notification bell to make sure you know when the next video goes live, and of course let me know in the comment section down below what ships, what topics you want me to cover in future videos. And like the ORTHRUS here, they don't even have to be ships that are currently available on live. Ask away, I'll see what I can do. Now if you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, you can do so either by joining us on Patreon, details are on screen now, and we do have a merchandise store over at Redbubble, so if you've ever fancied representing the Catskull Cartel, now you can with things like t-shirts, hoodies, notebooks, all kinds of like phone cases, that kind of thing there, and new designs are of course on the way. Let me know in the comment section as well if you've got a particular design you think would be really cool to get up there on the shop, and we'll see what we can do. Anyway, that all said and done, a long intro out of the way, let's have a look then at Mordu's Legion's ORTHRUS. Mordu's Legion are one of the special factions in New Eden, often mistakenly referred to as one of the pirate factions. They're not technically pirates, as we discussed in the Gamma video, they're actually a militant mercenary organisation with close ties to the Caldari state. They are not pirates. Now at the time of making this video as well, Mordu's Legion are currently not available in EVE Echoes. We don't know how or when you will actually get hold of their ships, the Gamma, the ORTHRUS and the Barghest. We don't know how you're going to get hold of these, but of course I will showcase that as soon as I know. I just know that the ORTHRUS is a very popular ship. A lot of you folks have told me it's the ship that you're looking forward to the most in the game, so I thought it'd be fun to sit down and actually have a look at what it is. Now, in the Gamma video, we talked about the foundation of Mordu's Legion, where they came from, where they started, so on and so forth. Now today I wanted to talk briefly about one of the cool bits of backstory that I found really interesting. Now, if you are drifting through the Gallente Federation systems, you might drift into Luminaire, and in Luminaire you'll notice that the 7th planet, Luminaire 7, is also known as Caldari Prime. And you might wonder why on earth there is a planet in Luminaire called Caldari Prime. Now you'll also spot that a couple of planets across is Gallente Prime. Basically the Caldari and the Gallente started in the same system as each other, at which point the Gallente kind of developed a little bit faster and a little bit stronger, and basically said, this is our space, we are federizing all of this, you are with us or you're against us, and the Caldari didn't really like that. There's a lot of distrust, a lot of bad stuff happens, and ultimately the Caldari leave and form their own state, the Caldari state, just a little bit further to the galactic north with the Citadel and the Forge. And indeed, if you are in Jita, you'll note that one system across is New Caldari, and if you jump into New Caldari, you'll see that all the planets there are also individually named, including New Caldari Prime, which is kind of the new Caldari core world. Caldari Prime, the ancestral homeworld, of course, does still exist, so what on earth happened to it? Well, basically, there was a big war, as I said, between the Caldari and the Gallente, and it kind of ends in this massive operation called Operation Highlander, where the Gallente Federation try to retake Caldari Prime from the Caldari state. There's a humongous battle that EVE Online players were actually capable of getting involved in, as was anyone who at that time played Dusk 515, which was a really cool shooter set in the EVE universe, sadly no longer exists. Basically, after that fight, Caldari Prime gets completely demilitarized. There are no military organizations allowed on the planet at all, and it is split kind of a 50-50 between the Ishukone Corporation and Material Acquisition, so that's the Caldari and the Gallente Federation. Little known fact, and why ultimately I'm talking about this in an ORTHRUS video, is that the peacekeeping operation here is handed over completely to Mordu's Legion. They remain currently in complete control of the planet's security coordination. They report directly to the Chief Executive Panel and the Gallente Senate for the sake of transparency, so they are peacekeepers between the Gallente and the Caldari Federation. And since their appointment as security, they've received praise from both sides. There have been no major complaints, couple of instances of heavy-handedness, etc., but overall, no major incidents have arisen, and Mordu's Legion take that job very seriously. It's not their home world, they're mainly based out in Pure Blind, theoretically, but they are the sole peacekeeping agency of Caldari Prime, which personally I found really interesting. I know a lot of you folks have mentioned you do like me talking a little bit about the backstory of the factions, so hopefully you enjoy that little tidbit there as well. Now, the ORTHRUS itself does follow that typical Mordu's Legion of silhouette of being almost completely symmetrical and very flat, very thin ships, very unique silhouette, very unique designs. They certainly stand out, but there is a certain angularity and ruggedness that does seem to suggest Caldari. They are closer to Caldari than they are to Gallente. If you had a fleet of Caldari ships with some Mordu's Legions ones in, they tend to fit in a little bit better than Gallente and Mordu's Legion, but hey, they work well together. I'm just talking visually. Now, to look at the attributes and fittings then of the ORTHRUS, we have one drone tube that can launch either small or medium drones, 6 high slots, 4 mid slots, 4 low slots, 3 power grid rigs, and 3 mechanical rigs. We've got a power grid output of 682 megawatts. That's enough to do everything we want to, but not quite enough to start playing around with too much in the way of oversized modules. It's a nice, secure amount of power grid without being silly. Defensively speaking, 19,674 is pretty fragile as far as the faction cruisers go. Certainly most of that here is in the shield, 6,617, with a slight boost to the amount of thermal resistances of these shields, not so much to the electromagnetic, sadly. Still got that electromagnetic hole there. Armor is 5,237, again with a slight boost to its thermal damage, and structure 4,826. This is definitely a shield tank ship, but yeah, it's still not overly tanky. Now, if we look at the rest of its stats, you might begin to understand why. Signature radius is a little bit larger than perhaps some of the other cruisers are. 94.1 meters ultimately is bigger than something like, say, a Rupture or a Stabber, but it's about on par with most other Caldari-sized ships. We've got a flight velocity of 255, which is erring towards the faster end of cruisers. It's not up there as the fastest by any stretch. I mean, heck, you've got Stabbers sitting at like 290 meters per second, but it is still pretty nippy and allows the ORTHRUS a great deal of maneuverability, as does the low inertia modifier and the fairly low mass, relatively speaking, compared to other cruisers. We also have a fairly high scan resolution here, 325 meters. It's not the highest, but it's good enough that we can start locking onto smaller ships with, fair speed to it. Looking at the trait description, this is a Mordu's Legion ship, so the roll bonus here is a 50% reduction to missile torpedo flight time, so they don't fly for as long as other torpedoes, but they fly an additional 200% faster than other missiles and torpedoes. Now, there was some discussion in the Gamma in the Gamma comment section that I want to make abundantly clear here. The maths on this, and I can back this up with the stuff you'll see in game, this gives a 50% increase to your missile range. Overall, this is a bonus to missile range of 50%, plus your missiles fly from your ship to target ship a lot faster than otherwise they would, almost 3 times as fast in fact. Now, you've also got a Warp Scrambler strength of +1 here. This means if you've got a Warp Scrambler fitted to the ship and it does 3 points of target scrambling, it's actually going to do 4 points, and if you've got a Predator that would do 5, it's actually going to do 6. Now, this is a stat that disappeared from a lot of ships in the October-November update. When the Interceptors got added into the game, when people were just about to hit Tech Level 8, I did a video talking about all the ships coming in Tech Level 8, and I mentioned about this Warp Scrambler strength on those. Then, literally less than a week later, NetEase came along and said, actually, we're taking that away. The Interceptors don't really need that. And so I don't anticipate that the ORTHRUS will actually make it onto live with that Warp Scrambler strength. But know that it was here on the test server. It may make it through to live. It might be one of the things that makes it, special as a faction cruiser, but I doubt it. Now, faction cruisers across the board get bonuses for Advanced Cruiser Command and for Advanced Medium Weapon System Operation. In this case, that's Advanced Medium Missile Torpedo Operation, and we're getting a bonus of 5% medium missile torpedo damage and a 5% increase to medium missile torpedo explosion velocity. This means 25% more damage from your torpedoes, or missiles. Those 6 high slots, therefore, actually act more like 7.5. It's not a huge amount of increase, but it means that those missiles do hit fairly hard. And notably, that increase to the explosion velocity means they hit faster moving ships that little bit better. So these, the missiles here on an ORTHRUS are more capable of applying their damage to smaller, faster moving targets like destroyers and frigates. And that is kind of a key point there just to remember. Now, Advanced Cruiser Command has a 10% increase to both the range of Warp Scramblers and Warp Disruptors, and I talked about this in the Gamma video. The main purpose for this is that this now means that your Warp Disruptors and your Warp Scramblers are longer range than your opponents. This means that you can be sitting in range of your Warp Scramblers, scrambling your opponent, whilst maintaining a distance outside of theirs. If their Scramblers are 15 kilometers, yours are 22.5. For example. Same with the Warp Disruptor, you're going to have a lot longer warp disruption than they have, and that allows you to actually maintain a distance whilst still holding your target down. Anyway, we'll have a look at that in regards to fitting. The fit that I'm going to showcase here for the ORTHRUS leans heavily on those Mordu's Legion roll bonuses, along with the ship's additional skill bonuses, mainly of course to the Warp Scrambler range. We are of course looking at a scram kiting build, and by scram kiting this is that dance that we do where we stay outside of their scrambler range but keep them within our scrambler range. Remember, most Warp Scramblers, a Predator Warp Scrambler as standard is 15 kilometers maximum range, so most ships are only going to have a Warp Scrambler of 15 kilometers. Our Warp Scrambler is 22.5 kilometers, so as long as we are further than 15 kilometers but closer than 22.5 kilometers, then they are scrammed, we are not. They do not have a micro warp drive, we have access to our micro warp drive. That is the aim of the ORTHRUS here in player versus player combat, and ultimately this fit does stay pretty much the same for PvE, but with a few adjustments that we'll talk about later. Now, in order to facilitate this, I've gone for medium torpedo launchers for our high slots. Now, torpedoes, you'll see, very high DPS, 158, higher DPS than medium missiles will have, but they still have sufficient range. 19.85 kilometers means we are still able to be outside of their scram range, whilst they are obviously still inside our scram range. It's nice having the medium missiles having a range of like 50 kilometers, but if you're out at 50 kilometers, they're not in your scrambler range, so you're kind of losing out on the point there. We go for the torpedoes, we stay outside of their scram range while keeping them within ours. I hope I'm not labouring that point too much, but I hope it is sinking in. Stay outside of their scram, keep them in your scram. Simple. Now, in order to help facilitate this, of course, we have a micro warp drive. The micro warp drive allows us to control that range. We can power to a distance that is within that 15 to 22 kilometer boundary. We then activate our warp scrambler. That switches off their micro warp drive and hopefully stops them from warping away out of combat. Hopefully destabilizes their ship's warp core. They're unable to flee. Now, as long as we are outside of their scram range, we can then use this with impunity. If it turns out that actually they've got a bit more damage than we hoped they would, you can use the warp drive to get out of a warp disruptor range, for example, and then flee that combat. And understand that obviously if they try to come close to you to use the scrambler to switch yours off, you can just use the micro warp drive to move back again. As long as you don't exceed the 22.5 kilometers, they will stay scrammed and unable to actually close that gap with you. You've got access to a micro warp drive, they're going to be running on afterburner or basic flight velocity. And if they're trying to run on afterburner, well, we've got two Predator stasis webifiers. Obviously these only have a range of 14.8, which means we are then suddenly going to be within scram range, but the idea here is mainly actually that the stasis webifiers are here in regards to drones or for PvE. There's not really much else we can put in here for the mid-slots and these two mid-slots, in fairness. Even if I were to take out the two stasis webifiers and the warp disruptor, we could not, we can't fit a large Nosferatu, and a medium Nosferatu just doesn't have the range required to operate outside of the scram range. You could fit a large neutralizer, I think, but again, I like to have the webifiers here in case I'm up against a drone ship. I can stay outside of their main ship's range whilst hitting 2 of their drones and stopping those. If you're up against something like a healer or a worm, you can actually screen off both their drones. Neither of their drones will be able to get within 14.8 kilometers, and you can keep the ship scrammed whilst staying outside of their scram range. This is an absolute beast for killing things like the worm and the healer. You can actually do some real hefty damage to even something like a rattlesnake. Yes, it's that serious, because obviously the rattlesnake's main power comes from 2 drones. If you can control those 2 drones and keep them away from you, well, you just kind of deal with the rattlesnake itself. You're acting like the drones aren't even there. Now, in order to get the damage that we've got here, 983.54, 948.42 of which is from the missiles, we also have in here in the low slots a Pitham C-type ballistic control system. Obviously, this is the weapon upgrade for missiles, 5% damage bonus, 4.5% activation time adjustment, faster firing missiles, or torpedoes in this case, faster firing torpedoes with higher damage. You can activate this for even faster firing and even higher damage. Then finally, for tank here, I've gone for a Pitham C-type medium shield booster and a Pith C-type adaptive invulnerability field. The adaptive invulnerability field just reduces any damage that we happen to take, whilst the C-type medium shield booster obviously allows us to boost up any damage that we do happen to take. Now, and if you did want to swap out any of the mid slots here, you could swap one of those webifiers. If you're not intending to go hunting anything that has drones, you could put on a couple of guidance disruptors or tracking disruptors, just again to help you mess with your opponent's system and keep you that little bit safer there. Obviously, whichever one you go for should be based on whichever weapon system you're intending to hunt. If you're intending to go up against turrets, put in a tracking disruptor or 2. If you're intending to go up against missiles, put on a guidance disruptor or 2. It's one of those I'm reluctant ever to put a guidance disruptor and a tracking computer, because you always end up with one that does nothing, but it does cover all your bases, so it's an option. Now, if you were to take this into PvE, this definitely works. As you'll see later on, I do showcase this in a nice PvE combat later on. All I do here is I swap out the medium torpedo launchers for Pitham C-type medium missile launchers, because suddenly the range there does become an important factor in PvE. Now, in regards to the rigs will remain the same across the board here. In the power grid combat rigs, I've gone for a warhead calefaction catalyst and a bay loading accelerator. Theoretically, 2 bay loading accelerators comes out slightly higher on the DPS, but it also comes out an awful lot higher on costs. If you're going for absolute min-maxing, go for 2 bay loading accelerators. Otherwise, a bay loading accelerator and a calefaction catalyst do just kind of give you that nice, it's only a couple of DPS short, but it is a couple of 100 million shorter on the price. The other side then are hydraulic bay thrusters. Flight velocity adjustment gives us that little bit of extra range here to the torpedoes. It is still useful on the missiles, but if you're building this primarily just for PvE, you might want to swap this one out just for more damage. More damage will probably do the job for you with the medium missile launchers rather than the medium torpedoes. But if you're going for PvP, you want that additional range to your missiles, and of course range to your torpedoes. You can do this either with hydraulic bay thrusters or with the rocket fuel cage petitions. I have tested this and there's really not much in it, so if it turns out the rocket fuel petitions are much cheaper, go for those. The hydraulic bay thrusters do work out slightly better. It's literally a difference. I think it was like 19.68 here, 19.85, sorry, for the hydraulic bay thrusters, whereas if I was using the rocket cage petition, it was like 19.68. It's so little difference, it doesn't really matter other than cost. Now, for the mechanical rigs here, I've gone for auxiliary thrusters because, well, movement speed, as I said, is very useful. Having a faster flight velocity means we're able to control that range between us and our opponent a bit better. A dynamic fuel valve helps reduce the cost of having the micro warp drive active, and we're not going to have it active often, but still having 40% less micro warp drive capacitor chew is always a good thing. And the final slot here is then a secondary auxiliary thrusters 3. This helps us in PvE by allowing us to maneuver around and take a little bit less damage, and in PvP, again, it's all about maintaining that scram kite. Now, the first thing I just wanted to showcase here briefly is that this is the ORTHRUS doing Bad Hair Day Part 3. Completely solo, with the fit you saw, but obviously with me having swapped to the medium missiles. I'm here against an elite pithy mower at this point, and I've managed to do Part 1 and Part 2 without any worries whatsoever. Part 3 is a little bit trickier. It's not in the case of having taken damage. I don't feel like I've ever really been at risk in this. It's just, as you can see here, getting some of these ships down just seems to take absolutely forever, especially since there's a lot of guidance disruptors going on here. 6 guidance disruptors means I'm constantly having to check the optimal range of my medium missiles and make sure that I'm getting a little bit closer or a little bit further away, depending on the situation. And this blasted mower, I think it's a Mower 2 Guardian, it's got shields for days. This thing, every time I start to get its shield down, it uses a shield extender. By the time I clear the shield extender, I maybe get a little bit of damage onto the shield before, boom, there we go again, there goes that shield extender. So I'm not going to sit here and showcase this entire fight, because trust me, it was a long, boring fight. But we did it. We got to the end of Bad Hair Day, completed all 3 sections with the ORTHRUS solo, utilising the fit that you see on screen now. We've got that Warp Scrambler for those faster moving ships that just happen to get right up and close and nasty. We've got the 2 Webifiers there for the ones that even manage to get closer into that. So you scram, you hit the 2 webs, and then you start hitting with your missiles. You'll find that even the interdictors, the elite interdictors, go down astonishingly quickly, even with medium missiles. So, you know, it's fairly easy to do Bad Hair Day. But what I wanted to showcase was something a bit more fun, so we're actually going to switch across now. I mentioned that one of the big problems in Bad Hair Day was of course the guidance disruptors, so why not go into Angel or Devil instead, which doesn't have guidance disruptors, it's purely tracking disruptors as far as E-War goes, and well, we don't have turrets. So here we are, this is part 3 of Angel or Devil, which is the T10 Storyline encounter for the Minmatar side of things. You can see I've cleared a couple of these waves already. I've jumped out and then jumped in because I just wanted to showcase it quite nicely. Jumping in here, we've got an Elite Gisty Slasher 2 Interceptor, Elite Gisty Rupture. There's a couple of other elites around here as well, like a Tempest and that, I think. You see that obviously we've come in here, we've got a couple of target painters on us, alongside a couple of Nosferatis, well, 6 target painters. Oh well. And we're going to look at taking out some of those Slasher 2 Interceptors. The Elite Gisty Slasher 2 Interceptor doesn't seem to want to know us right about now. It's actually sitting there quite comfortably at like 110 kilometers away. I'm powering away from the Slasher 2 Interceptor that is trying to approach. You'll see here that the missiles are still hitting it. They're not hitting it for particularly much, but it's enough damage that it is going to take them out fairly quickly. The second one there's come in at is coming in at like 28 kilometers, 26, 25. So I've got 2 of these Slasher 2 Interceptors now easily within my range. I am scrambling the first one here just in case it's using a micro warp drive just to turn that off. Not quite in Webifire range, and you can actually see the Slasher 2, I've actually outranged it. I've gone a little bit too far away because I've got my micro warp drive active, it hasn't got its micro warp drive active, and oops, I've powered too far away. But oh well, those missiles are still capable of hitting. You can see there that the missiles, obviously they've got a maximum range of about 60 kilometers at this point in time. There goes that first Slasher 2 Interceptor. We're now going to take on the second one. I hit the lock all, and there's that Elite Gisty Cyclone 2 Guardian. That one proves fairly problematic in this mission. Again, like the Mower 2 Guardian, not for any dangerous reasons, but because it just will not die. It takes blasted hours to go down, it feels like. Anyway, Gisty Slasher 2 Interceptor here. The second one, you can see I've got that now just coming into scram range. Not that I'm needing it, those missiles are quite comfortably doing the damage required. It is inside scram range now, it's coming closer to web range. I'm almost tempted to just ignore the Scrambler and the Webifier. I'm going to put them on, but almost tempted not to bother just to save the capacitor. But you'll see there, it does slow right down. When the next wave of missiles hits, you'll see that it does increase the damage. Obviously, missile damage calculation there is based on the target's total maximum flight velocity at that point in time. So now we come to the Gisty Cyclone 2. It's easily in range, we've got no worries here, this does very little damage to us, but you'll see that just the amount of damage I can dish out with those missiles just doesn't feel like much, and I'm manually piloting around here because I don't want to get too far away from things. I don't want to end up, you know, an entire galaxy away from the rest of this anomaly, but I also don't want to get too close, and you can see it just takes a long time for that damage to apply. Missiles have launched, 4,000 damage there. It's a large amount of damage, it's just how much tank these Cyclone 2 Guardians and that Mower 2 Guardian have. It just feels like it's going to take forever. and ultimately it does. But I wanted to showcase there that there's no risk at all from things like the interceptors. This entire mission goes on very much like this. I drift at range here, I take down this Cyclone 2, I then go after the Elite Gisty Tempest, that takes even longer to die, then finally I come into range of the Slasher 2, it does get a little bit close, range-wise, obviously I scram it, I webify it, and the missiles just take it down, and it's about 8 or 9 salvos to take that one out. So the ORTHRUS 100% is capable of doing Tech 10 storyline encounters without much worry at all. It takes very little damage doing these. You can see the capacitor barely touches like at all, it just doesn't seem to dip. It's just a long time. These take a long time to clear, possibly because of how missiles have their spread damage, but the range of them, plus the ORTHRUS's capabilities, just make for, a nice, safe way of doing this. It's PvP where the ORTHRUS really shines. Unfortunately, here on the test server, obviously you can see, if you've been watching these on with me on the test server, you've never seen it more than one person in local, because it is pretty much myself and a few other content creators, of varying degrees, and it's, trying to organise is a very difficult thing with those. So ultimately, as it stands, I'm not showcasing PvP here for the ORTHRUS until this reaches live. After all, you know what? I think it's a nice thing to save. When I redo this video, when the ORTHRUS hits live, we can showcase its PvP capabilities there, and it's a nice, exciting thing to look forward to. Anyway, that is about everything here I want to say in regards to the ORTHRUS. I love this ship, I love how it looks, I love how it plays. The Gamma is one of my favourite frigates, very excited for that one coming out. And here with the ORTHRUS, I know it's a ship that a lot of you are looking forward to. Again, I'm sorry, I don't know when this is due to hit live. I have no idea how you'll get it when it is available on live. There's been talk in the final test and the open beta test, which I was part of, that was December, January 2019 and June, July 2020. When we did those tests, we did have access to the Mordu's Legion ships. They were achieved by, essentially, there were some really cool events. There was like a couple of invasions and that. A load of developer ships turned up, and fleets of literally hundreds of Capsuleers turned up to try and take the devs down. And it was just a big firefight towards the end of each of those betas that did earn you wreckage. And there has been talk that that might be how we get Mordu's Legion wreckage, debris and that for reverse engineering the blueprints in EVE Echoes. It might be events where we take on the developers, and if you take part in that, if you're lucky enough to kill a developer who is flying a Barghest or an ORTHRUS or a Gamma, obviously you get the parts from their ship in the looting. You can then reverse engineer some blueprints. There is hope otherwise that we go down the EVE Online route. In EVE Online, the Mordu's Legion ships are rare spawns in low-sec anomalies, and that would be a really cool reason to get people into low-sec anomalies, and the more people doing low-sec anomalies, for people like me who like low-sec PvP, that is a really cool way to get people into low-sec anomalies, hoping that they're going to clear those anomalies and there's a Mordu's Legion ship at the end of it, and that they can destroy and get some debris from. That gives me some targets in low-sec PvP, which I would be super happy about having there. So netties, if you're listening, that would be my preferred way of doing things. Make the Mordu's Legion ships very rare spawns in low-sec or null-sec anomalies, and that gives people a reason to do those encounters, gives me some targets for PvP. That would make me happy. I'm sure that would make a lot of other people happy, as it means there's a way to get Mordu's Legion debris. That would be my preferred way of doing it. Anyway, folks, you can see here now that I'm still taking things down here. My capacitor has dropped a little bit, thanks to me being hit with the Nosferatu in range, and having to activate my shield booster for an extended period of time due to me getting a little bit too close to some stuff. But you'll see that now I am beginning to take on that Elite Gisty Slasher 2 Interceptor. These are the ships that cause most people problems, so I've waffled on just long enough to showcase this in this video. Huzzah and rejoice. I know a lot of you have probably already switched off at this point, but if you are one of the people who's like, no, I want absolute proof that this ship is capable of doing it, I think Benzie's lying to me, well then here's your evidence. I should probably turn that shield booster off as well. Obviously, yeah, I'm watching recorded footage of me having done this. I'm not recording this whilst whilst doing it. I used to, but I found that that was problematic, it was distracting, and all kinds of craziness was happening. Now here I'm looking at myself screaming, turn off the shield booster, it's chewing your capacitor, and you're at full shields. It's something I'm really so guilty of. But you can see there the Elite Gisty/2 Interceptor. It is scrammed, it's webbed, it's 12 kilometers away, and it's halfway through its structure, and there we go. There's proof that even the interceptors are not a problem on this storyline encounter at all. Anyway, folks, I promise that is now the end of this video. Thank you ever so much for watching. Let me know what excites you most about the ORTHRUS. I know a lot of you are looking forward to this. Hopefully this has given you just that teasing little sort of bit to bide you over until eventually this gets added to the game. Otherwise, folks, thank you ever so much for watching to the end. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden!